Thank you everyone for joining us. A very warm welcome to those who've been able to join us, and a special note of mention to Victoria for joining us for the session today and agreeing to share her insights as an industry practitioner. Uh, to set the agenda for today's session, let us first talk about what we're going to cover briefly over the next 55 odd minutes. Firstly, we're going to talk a bit more about what changing sourcing priorities are we seeing in the market, the shift towards a modern procurement operating model, and how are organizations using modern sourcing practices to drive key business objectives. We'll also try bring in some perspectives on how sourcing leaders are embedding sustainability into their procurement practices. I think Victoria has a lot of real life expertise on that. We'll also touch base on how global services are faring at an overall level compared to 2021, 2022, where the markets were growing, and right now, what are we seeing in the market? And then finally, in the last section, we'll talk a bit more about some key outsourcing deal trends, pricing trends to understand how outsourcing costs have changed over the last 6 months and what are the levers sourcing leaders are really looking at beyond rate cards to optimize costs. With that, then I'll hand it over to my colleague Banushi to talk us through the key changing sourcing priorities.
Thanks a lot, Ricky. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and, great to share a lot of great insights with you today. We have very diverse people over here on this call today, so I'm sure you'll find great value in this session with the experiences that everyone brings in. All right. So without further ado, I'll get started. Firstly, the key question is about, sourcing priorities, right? What is procurement thinking about? What are the levers that they're using these days to be able to achieve their objectives? So the first question that we get asked is, what are sourcing priorities for 2024, right? And we have done a large number of surveys. We've had a large number of conversations with CPOs, procurement leaders, category managers, vendor management leaders across the board. And the key theme we've been hearing is that they want to do more with less, right? Now, some of you may argue with me that, oh, this has been the theme that procurement has been thinking about for the past 25 years, right? So what I want to say is that, yes, it is true, but it is what it is, right? A lot of years, a lot of past years were focused more on cost optimization, right? There was more focus on saving costs. There wasn't much earlier on actually driving innovation and revenue, but that's the shift that we are seeing now going forward. So if you see the results on the left side of this slide, you'll see that an equal number of companies, around 60%, have said that they want to drive revenue as well as they want to drive cost optimization, which wasn't the case in the past couple of years. If you would have seen, it was more around just costs, right? Now, the question that we come across after this is that what is it that they're going to do to be able to achieve these objectives? And the answer is technology, right? So the first lever that companies are planning to use is technology modernization, upgrading it, whether it be in procurement or whether it be across functions as well, for which procurement is sort of the key orchestrator, right? If the firm is buying technology, then procurement is the one that is going to be enabling the purchase of those technologies. So that's the key lever that is being used. However, there's also a lot of focus on, of course, data analytics, getting, a lot of information together, as well as process optimization. So you can think about tech, you can think about process, and then there's a lot of focus around sustainability and driving, sustainable growth, not just thinking about, okay, we're going to drive innovation and drive our suppliers to do something. We also want everything to be done in a more sustainable fashion, looking at the current trends in the market. So with that, what we'll do now in the next couple of slides is we'll talk about each of these, right? We'll talk a little bit about tech, then we'll talk about process, and we'll also talk about sustainable strategies. So the first thing we want to start with is tech. If we move to the next slide, you'll see that procurement leaders within their functions itself are using a lot of solutions now, new sort of tech solutions as well as point solutions beyond the existing ones that they already have. So there was a certain amount of, technology investment that is increased over the past year or so. And that is a great thing, right? So some of you may ask whether it's just related to AI, Gen AI, maybe that has sort of kicked off this trend or what, but whatever the reason is, the trend has kicked off. And there's a lot of emphasis on now, moving beyond your S2P suites or your best of breed tools that you had to move to the sourcing optimization tools, autonomous sourcing solutions, moving more towards AI-driven sourcing, and so on and so forth. Right. So we have been working with a lot of providers in this space, and we've been talking to companies who are actually, let's say, they're sitting already with their S2P suites. Ariba is there. They have their best of breed solutions. And then on top of that, they're getting these AI point solutions for specific activities. Either they're piloting with, let's say, a little bit of, let's say they're getting a bot to optimize their risk management process, or they're just going all in and they're getting an AI driven suite to sort of automate their entire sourcing process. So having talked about this, I also want to invite Victoria now because I know she has a lot of industry experience in this space. So Victoria, what have you seen, sourcing leaders adopt these days, especially with the tech sort of modernization going on?
I think, thank you very much, Banushin. It's actually a real pleasure being here with you and sharing my expertise. Jumping back into the question. So what I detect is that sourcing leaders are really trying to solve problems for their companies broader than necessarily even just procurement problems. Because as you rightly said, a lot of previous discussion was about best of breed of best of suite. I think now it's gone to one side with the advent of AI and blockchain. So what we're seeing now is a lot of different trials of large language models and AI within procurement to address all sorts of different issues, from category management to negotiation to actually supply chain transparency, data modeling. The other thing that I'm seeing is that what these big S2P suites are lacking, if I may say so, in my opinion, the point solutions needed to address the ESG, the sustainability challenges. They demand more than just, the usual sourcing, contracting, and supply relationship management. They demand actually understanding certain regulatory compliance of the suppliers, which is highly complex. So ESG integration into the procurement suite is happening. I think sustainability, and we'll talk about it later, brings a lot of challenges, and especially challenges of scaling that we're still not seeing technology successfully solve. But this is certainly, there is an attempt of the big suppliers understanding the point, the new developers, and how to integrate. And there's a lot of API now being developed in the large Jaeger, Coupa, Ariba suites to bring in best of breed small suppliers specifically dealing with ESG. All of the S2P suites are racing to implement AI within their suites. So not only using ChatGPT on your phone, but actually having it inside and making sense of a lot of unstructured data. The other thing I'm seeing actually is these suites moving away from just standard procurement solutions into category-specific purchasing. Because from my experience buying logistics and the technology needed for that, and the control towers required for delivering successful logistics and supplier management there and invoice management there, vis-a-vis buying direct materials and indirect is completely different. So what we're even seeing SAP and Ariba to do, if you're looking at it, is actually moving away from just Ariba into a spend management suite that integrates specific solutions to solve specific problems, like temporary labor. It has a completely different suite of solutions, right? As well as blockchain for material transparency, which is also quite important to ESG. So I'm seeing ESG coming up, very new point solutions with startups. So the challenge is, how do you even make sure that these startups are going to be still viable financially? S2P suites opening up with APIs, but S2P suites also starting to specialize on specific categories of spend. Over to you, Bag.
That was excellent. And actually, it's very interesting to hear from you about blockchain and these new startups, right? Because these just working with blockchain startups and all these new age tech players is actually putting a new set of challenges on procurement teams, wherein they're saying, how do we even frame our indemnity clause with these small companies, right? How do we work with them? Because you can't just have all these $1 million indemnity clauses. That's not the amount of money these startups have.
Yeah, correct. But also, how do you do financial due diligence on these suppliers? Because if they're going through round one, through the ABC rounds, they're actually loss making. So,
Exactly.
they're revenue grabbing. So in our procurement worldview, we want to de-risk our company and have a secure, solid supplier. But these new exciting solutions that are coming up often are from loss leaders. So this also puts a lot of challenge on procurement as well as on finance to figure out how to make this work, for sure.
Definitely. It's an exciting and risky time to be in for procurement. So let's see how it goes. Great. So this was around tech modernization, right? The next level that we wanted to talk about was process. So if we just move to the next slide, you'll see that, we've sort of tried to give a view on what the traditional procurement operating model looked like and how the modern procurement model, operating model is looking like, right? And what are the change drivers for it? So of course, if you are in the current times, these change drivers are really obvious, right? There's a whole new technology revolution that is happening. There are new ways of working. There's a very big need for accelerated speed to market. So sourcing cycle times need to reduce, right? We need to be more resilient. We need to have those risk mitigation strategies in place. We cannot just get away with not having those anymore. So if we look at this particular slide and we look at the right side, especially, modern sourcing and modern procurement is definitely more outcome focused, right? And when I say outcomes, it's not just your cost savings or avoidance, it's going way beyond that. What is the process efficiency you're able to drive? What are your sourcing cycle times? What are your ESG targets? Are you meeting those ESG targets, or actually, as a procurement function, are you enabled to sort of be a sustainable practice, right, in the long run as well? If you're adopting AI, then are you structured in such a way? Are you ready for that change to be able to adopt AI and those type of new age technologies into your procurement function as is? So that's what modern teams are thinking like. And one of the great questions we get asked is this industry agnostic? Is this category agnostic? And is it common across, all these large companies which have regulatory and compliance issues? And the answer is yes, everyone is thinking about it, right? It's not just that you're one of those high new age type of lean agile procurement teams. It's all over now. It's in the tech companies, it's in the insurance companies, it's in the banks, it's everywhere, right? So with that exciting new development, I think what we want to also talk about a little bit is what are the various things that come now within this modern sourcing model. And for that, I think if we can move to the next slide, we'll see that of course, there's a certain approach behind it. You want to accelerate your sourcing practices. And the reason we want to sort of adopt this is because it gives you a very big competitive advantage, right? So if we go back to the first thing that we spoke about, driving revenue acceleration, driving cost optimization, responding to the ever changing stakeholder needs is going to be more of the norm now going forward, because there's going to be new sourcing practices. There's going to be a lot of spend in the upcoming years, and it's going to be different types of spend than what we are used to as procurement teams. So we need to gain and we need to, sort of really speed up our learning processes as procurement teams very fast now. We need to be more agile in the way we run. One of the examples that we've seen large companies implement is now very simple thing, right? But just cross training of resources. It's not that, you have, of course, you have certain category managers and all of that, but everyone can do everything, so that you have that agility, you have that fast response time. So, and of course, there's a lot of, supplier collaboration, innovation that you drive. You leverage a lot of data and analytics, and all of those aspects are there. So with that, I think, again, I would bring back Victoria, and I would like to ask her to share some industry nugget on what she's heard.
During my time in my previous organization, as we grew the procurement function, a 100-year organization, but actually the procurement function was only 5-6 years old. As we grew it, we also challenged ourselves in not just being centralized or central-led. I think centralization to the nth degree wasn't something that in indirects with 14 countries we wanted to do. Central-led wanted to look at what are indeed the best practices within the organizational models. And what I see is actually, I actually think there is a move, depending on your company and the structure and the types of purchasing needs you have, to more of a cross-collaboration committee approach to buying. And I think this is what I see in big multinational companies with the former peers of mine that I talked about across industries. I think if you know what you're buying, you standardize it and it becomes very process driven. Also, I think if you're a procurement function that reports into finance versus you report into supply chain or chief operating officer, the approach, the KPIs are going to be naturally different. That allows you a different way of collaborating and experimenting with your joint KPIs and collaboration. I definitely think that agile procurement is, as you rightly said, Manushi, happening with different and new types of spend. So you cannot run an RFP necessarily when you don't know what you want to buy. You have a need or an IT need that you need to resolve. It's not a standard purchase. Agility and thinking outside the box, but also the deep understanding of that technical activity purchase that you need to do is becoming critical. So there is less process and more collaboration. So in my experience, deep collaboration with the IT teams to ensure that I really understand what they're buying and I can support them rather than through just a standard RFP, through POCs, making sure that they don't sign off everything before the POC is done, or as the POC is done, making sure that the supplier collaboration has a very, very clear term that the supplier is also protected. They understand if they put all this engagement into a collaboration, what are they going to get out of it if the collaboration is successful or not? So agility and cross-functional teams are hugely, hugely important. And then there comes at the forefront of it all, as I said, who do you report into? Does that allow you that agility and collaboration? And also your specific category of spend. I see that the category of spend dictates actually to a large degree the organizational model that the companies adopt. So if the spend is very commoditized, you can continue as is, leverage technology to make sure that it is faster. But if it is actually highly complex and new, R&D, development, blockchain, less suppliers to choose from, then internal collaboration and stakeholder management and cross-functional teams become so critical. Agility and iteration as well. I don't know how you see that in your dealings with your clients.
No, definitely. I mean, I completely agree that it's very specific to the firms and the categories needs, right? So it has to be contextualized in that manner. But having said that, initially, there was a time when white space R&D was the only category where these type of innovative processes were happening. So, killing the RFP, having a collaborative sort of session. But now I sort of see it flowing to the larger categories as well. And that is great, right? That is great that we are actually opening our mind enough and opening it to the larger spend buckets as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. And actually, because the demand for transformation is so big, also in the other indirect categories, be it HR or be it marketing, you have the cycle times of delivery shortened, which means that we as sourcing and procurement professionals need to think outside the box on how to engage. So you're absolutely right. Agility and acceleration becomes so much more important in wider categories of spend. I agree with you.
Definitely. All right. And with that, I think I want to just point out to the audience here once, right? Like we are here to sort of answer your questions as well. So we've been talking to each other a lot, but we do want to talk to you. So do drop your questions in the Q&A section, and we will definitely try to answer as many of them as possible as we go through this session. Okay. So we now want to talk a little bit about sustainability, right? If we move to the next page, you'll see that procurement or sourcing leaders are increasingly adapting sustainable procurement practices. And there's a certain ESG strategy that a firm has as a whole, right? But there's an ESG strategy that the procurement team is also having in order to align that to the firm-wide goals. So it's not just around, let's say, ESG. Of course, you will be engaging with a lot of ESG rating agencies, trying to measure your suppliers as much as possible. But it's also around making sure your entire procurement program is a holistic ESG program. It's not just talking about measuring and then, oh, what should we do with the data after we've measured it? It's also about using the data to actually make your decisions, right? So if we, move to the next slide, we also want to just bring focus on when we talk about any program as a whole, right? There's a certain level of prioritization that we need to do. So we can't do everything across all suppliers. We need to prioritize in terms of the ESG risk and the supplier's criticality of the business. It's like any supplier stratification that you would do, but this is being done in terms of the ESG aspect. Right, so only certain best-in-class ESG practices will be adapted with the critical suppliers, right? We need to mitigate the ESG risk with them, but we also need to think about how can we engage these suppliers to sort of meet our targets as well, right? Whether it's the targets are in terms of, let's say, social, increasing your supplier diversity spend, or it can be around reducing carbon emissions. Now, this really varies firm to firm, right? There's no specific one size fits all approach over here. So I think in this particular case, Victoria, I know you have a lot of perspectives and you've been, doing a lot of sessions these days around sustainability. So what is the latest and greatest in the procurement world when it comes to sustainability?
There are a couple of things that procurement leaders might want to take note of. As you rightly said, it's not a nice to have, it's a must-have integration into our day-to-day work. Sustainability has to be a pillar of every category strategy. It has to also speak to the company's strategic priorities and must be absolutely aligned. The biggest developments that I'm seeing, also because I'm chairing the Sustainable Procurement Pledge Human Rights chapter, is specifically on the huge amount of differing human rights regulation that is coming. So before, if you look at ESG, and we've had it for what, about 12 years, maybe longer, as actually a tool for investors to see which companies to invest in. It's grown from that considerably. But if I think about maybe 8-10 years ago, we, as procurement professionals, were trying to get our heads around environmental risk. And what does that mean? And add to our toolkit an understanding of what environmental damage or impact can our category or our suppliers or our buying patterns have. Now it's all about social risk. Environment's not going away, but social risk is adding to it. So what we're seeing is a lot of EU regulation coming on that actually is not only responsible for EU companies, but any company wanting to deal and import into the EU market. Any big company that wants to do business in the EU. We see that the US is having and Canada having more regulation. I think historically the regulation was pretty much you self-declare whether you have any issues within your supply chain or not. Now, if you're found to have issues by a third party, a whistleblower or a government organization, and they have the right to come and investigate. If they investigate and find that you haven't done enough to address this issue, they can shut you down. they can take the products out of the EU market, et cetera, et cetera. So the regulatory risk has become huge. And as a result, the governance of this, the reporting and the tracking is becoming so much more complex. So that's definitely what's happening in the world of ESG, in my opinion, now. But from a perspective, how to set yourself up as a sourcing specialist or a CPO or somebody who is looking at it from a sourcing perspective, very, very important to do the materiality assessment. Supplier angle is super, super important, like you're saying, Banushi. I would always go from a category and also data angle as well. The challenge that we have now in procurement is you do the supplier materiality assessment, like you said here, and you engage correctly with the biggest, most critical suppliers. Unfortunately, some regulation requires you to actually look at all your supply base or majority, which becomes very challenging and goes back to the need for ESG systems integration, because now it's not only about you looking at the biggest proportion of your spend, which is the smallest amount of your suppliers, but actually across the board at all your suppliers in a certain category, which when you have a lot of tail spend becomes very, very risky, especially in a social aspect. If you have a lot of, may I say, blue collar labor or migrant labor, that becomes a big, big risk for a company and a need to rethink your supplier engagement, your SRM strategies.
Definitely agree on that point. I think some of the oil and gas majors will, be agreeing with you on this aspect, right? It's so important for them, especially to manage
Construction.
construction. Exactly. Right. All right. So now, since our audience has not asked us any questions yet, we would like to engage you all through a poll. So, Sumit, do you want to, take this forward and ask the audience a couple of questions?
Sure, Bhanushi. Thank you, Bhanushi and Victoria, for so many insights. Now, I think it's the right time to have a poll over here. So, trying to understand what are the key sourcing priorities which meets your organizational objectives. We have multiple options: technology modernization, all the insights that the team just spoke, data insights, utilization, process reengineering, sustainability strategy, supplier collaboration, innovation. I'm excited to see the result, but Ricky, anything that you believe will, I'm already seeing some result coming in, but what's your view? What do you see that will be the key sourcing priority?
Okay, so I don't want to bias the audience in any way, but I'd probably vote for number 2 and probably number 4. So I my bets would be on these two being the top priorities, but yeah, let's see what the audience thinks. Close enough.
Okay. Yeah, you were close enough. Actually, you were close enough. So based on the insights, and thank you everyone for participating in this poll. Uh, Data and insights utilization and supplier collaboration and innovation is something which is being seen as the key sourcing priorities. And interestingly, we are going to touch a lot around the supplier collaboration aspects as well in the coming few pages. But yes, this resonates with what we are seeing in the market, and closely the themes that even Bhanushi and Victoria touched upon. Going forward, what we want to do on the next set of sections is that we want to give a view on how we are seeing the overall global services market evolving, the overall ITBP services landscape in terms of the locations. So what are the market developments happening across the locations? So what we are seeing in the market is that, yes, the global services industry momentum is growing. It grew even during the times of COVID. But in the year 2024, it's going to be slightly tempered. And this is all in comparison. So it's compared to 2021 and 2022, where it was the complete glory days of the global services market. What we are going to see is that in 2024, the industry revenue will grow and breach the 300 billion US dollar mark, and we'll be reaching a 10 million FTEs mark by 2024. Even though the growth is slow, but it's still growing and the momentum is resilient enough. Now, while this was the global view, the next set of pages will highlight more on the geography aspects. So, for example, what we are seeing is that on the next page that APAC location continues to hold the lion's share in the market. Now, we all know that APAC is quite big in the entire offshore, nearshore location. And within APAC, the two largest name that comes to our mind is the likes of India, the Philippines, which comprise the largest proportion of talent. On the left-hand side, we are talking around the headcount. This is the export services headcount and does not include the domestic services market. APAC continues to grow. It has stagnated at around that 59-60% mark, but that's a huge number that we are seeing. But on the right-hand side, if you start seeing things, then APAC also holds a lion's share in the new center setups, but the locations in Middle East, Africa, even in Europe, especially in the parts of Western Europe, the new center setup activity has been strong. However, from the headcount perspective, Europe has not been seeing that much demand or that much growth of late in the last 1 to 2 years. And the reasons are varied. For example, there were some geopolitical conflicts in the region, even the ongoing conflicts, even though it's happening in the Middle East, Africa region, they have some implications on the nearing European Union as well. So because of all these changes, there are some challenges in the growth in Europe, but yet the market is resilient. The global services momentum is growing, and across locations, we expect the growth to happen in the year 2024 as well. Now, a similar view from an outsourcing deal standpoint is that in terms of outsourcing deals as well, we are seeing that the growth is happening and APAC actually continues to lead the charts. So on the next page, when we start highlighting the things around the outsourcing deals, you get to understand that, yes, the share of APAC in terms of all those outsourcing deals has risen significantly compared to 2020 and 2021. In 2020 and 2021, not a lot of deals were happening. The entire world was in turmoil. In latter half of 2021 and 2022 was like the year where so many outsourcing deals, transactions continued to happen. And by the way, most of these deals, I know many of you must have guessed this as well, but most of the deals were in the space of IT and specifically in digital services, the likes of AI, cloud, analytics. There were deals in ER&D, your business process side of the services as well, but digital segment continues to grow. And I would like to actually get Ricky's your insights as well on this one. That how do you see when you talk to your suppliers, when you regularly talk to your supplier client base, how do you see this field spanning and what type of contracting are you seeing out there in the market?
No, I think very much talks to the analysis that you are presenting, Sumit. APAC continuing to occupy a lion's share in the overall mix of global services or global delivery locations. I think goes without saying. Probably, I think India is a very sort of holds a more dominant position. I think, in addition, I think an interesting fact is that we're also seeing a lot of outsourcing activity happening in some of these emerging markets in Asia. So, for example, I think if you looked at the recent results analysis from TCS, they reported nearly 38% in growth in the revenue from the APAC market alone, right? In fact, it was India market alone. So there's a lot of activity, outsourcing activity happening in some of these emerging markets in Asia, which is India, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on. So we're kind of seeing a lot of activity, and probably these are the markets where the next set of growth will come from in the coming 2 years, as we see the larger, the more mature markets start to slow down or stagnate a bit.
Absolutely, Ricky. For the markets, especially in the Southeast Asia region, the likes of Indonesia, Vietnam, we are also seeing quite a surge in the export services headcount growth. A lot of our clients are speaking about what the next for those locations, because yes, there is too much of concentration already in India. While definitely India has to be there in your global services mandate, but what's beyond India and the impact that needs to be explored, that's definitely on the charts. Now, with that, we also actually conduct a lot of these surveys, a key issues study survey that we conducted very recently, and we do this annually. What we got to know is that across the three shores, the onshore, nearshore, and offshore, markets have very different views in terms of the global services growth. So on the next section that you will see is that in 2023, the offshore market grew, the sentiment in the market was that it will grow by 7.5%. The onshore and nearshore growth is also going to happen, but it's not going to grow at the same pace as the offshore market. This time it's even more pronounced. So the difference between onshore and nearshore growth is going to be much lower than what you're going to see for offshore growth. And right now we are sitting in May 2024. We are already seeing this trend actually materializing in the market. Offshore locations are growing faster than the onshore nearshore location. And while the growth definitely is lower than the likes of 2023, but the growth wave is pushing a lot of work streams, a lot of positions are opening up in offshore markets, a lot of global process ownership, those type of roles are also coming up in offshore markets. So that's where a lot of emphasis is. Now, this is also partially driven by the fact that cost and margin pressures, which is another finding from our key issue study survey, has again rose into emergence. And because of those cost and margin pressures, off- offshore is the location where you're trying to optimize as much of the cost, try to improve your margins. Definitely, there are other things at play, but a location arbitrage, for example, between Bay Area versus an India, definitely you get the likes of 75% of the cost savings. That's humongous. That's huge number that we are speaking about.
I think just to add to this, Sumit, I think this goes back to a few years ago during COVID. I think when I kind of look at outsourcing deals, say pre-COVID, a lot of the deals were kind of at that 80-85% sort of offshore mix, right? That's a good thumb rule to follow when you're doing an offshore and outsourcing based deal. That 80% of my team is based out of low cost locations, 20% is based onshore. Now that thumb rule, we're kind of pretty much seeing it being closer to 90-95%, right? Because kind of COVID changed the perception that a lot of clients had about leveraging or relying too much on India. I think so that's what has changed over the last couple of years. And kind of we're seeing some of the, and as you rightly said, right, the cost and margin pressures that we are kind of clients are facing is kind of forcing some of the largest, most cash-rich companies as well to start exploring location arbitrage. And we're seeing some of the very sort of Fortune 50, sort of very large, even wealth management, investment management firms exploring to set up, say, GICs or GBS centers in low-cost locations. Of course, they're kind of following different approaches. Not everybody wants to sort of do a big bang outsourcing approach. They're kind of following different approaches like build, operate, transfer, and things like that to kind of keep it low risk. But then everybody is definitely exploring moving work to some of these low-cost offshore and nearshore locations.
And you touched upon an interesting thing, Ricky. And on the next page, actually, we have something on this one that, and some of this insight is also coming from our AI-driven platform, Talent Genius, is that what is the shift happening in the sourcing model? We are seeing that there, while there is demand for providers, there is a demand for the enterprise of the GBS side of the business as well. The shift, both in terms of what the sentiment is out there in the market. So, for example, the left side talks around the sentiments that 48% of our respondents in key issue study survey, which I was speaking about on the previous page, they believe that GBS model is the wave of growth that they want to embark on. And that is also being seen on the data that we are getting from Talent Genius, that yes, the talent demand has dropped across both the service provider and enterprise, but the enterprise demand is still stronger than the service provider demand. And just day before yesterday, I was doing the analysis for Q1 of 2024 as well. This difference between service provider demand and enterprise demand is even sharper now. So it's even large. The difference will be even higher. So yes, the GBS demand is growing. Some shifts we are seeing in sourcing perspective, definitely there will be, this is the overall ITBP market. If we take this by different roles, if we take it for procurement, if we take it for, let's say, investment banking, the things will change. But this is the overall view that we are getting in, from the market. Now, moving to the next section, Ricky, do you want to talk around these pricing trends and the negotiation strategies?
Sure. So I think just given the whole sentiment around how cost is a very key business objective this year, or cost optimization, I think it'll be important to talk a bit more about what are we seeing in the space of outsourcing cost and pricing trends, and what other negotiation levers are enterprise clients using to keep their outsourcing costs in check in a way. Let's start with the poll, and let's get the audience to share their perspectives. If we move to the next page, yeah. So what would be your key challenge in terms of leveraging the global services model to drive your key business objectives? So I'll also take the opportunity to invite Victoria to share her inputs on, in your opinion, what do you think are the key challenges when it comes to leveraging global services delivery model for our enterprise clients?
I think from my perspective, as I was sitting for a long time in Asia itself, actually what prevented my former company to do a proper GBS and even shared services before GBS was the minimal cost advantage and the huge disparity of language needs. But if you are a big company residing in the US or Canada, for example, the risks and the challenges would be very, very different. So I think more about geopolitical risks if you're in Europe sitting there, or maybe even suboptimal SLAs and complex contractual models, right? Like if you are more of a US, UK or Canadian company. So it really, really depends on the perspective of the individual company. I got out of it, right? Because I don't know who the 84 participants are, where they sit and what challenges they face. But for an Asian-based company, certainly the cost advantages were minimal, although the strategic advantages might have been huge.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I think, okay, so the audience has, I think the biggest pain point for a lot of them seems to be on the lack of supplier innovation. I think I'm not very surprised to see that. I think I think for lack of a better word, I think a lot of things in terms of how providers have been focusing on is a lot of keeping the lights on and keeping the lights on at a minimum cost. So that's where typically a lot of enterprises have lamented about, okay, we got all of this. Our provider said they'll do all this as part of the deal, but none of it is really done and none of it is really implemented, and it's just kind of keeping the lights on. Or they're like, oh, even all my SLAs are met, they're all green, but then my users are not happy, right? What's the challenge? So lack of supply innovation clearly being the most distinct factor, followed by obviously, as you articulated, right, location, talent risk, right? Are we at the right location? The geopolitical conflict that we're seeing globally right now, and then obviously the minimal cost advantages. I think that's again the clear challenge to solve for, given that the kind of inflation we're also seeing in some of the emerging markets, right? India, Philippines, Indonesia, they're also seeing a lot of inflation. So the cost arbitrage equation seems to have changed significantly since this outsourcing wave started a decade or so ago. So yeah.
Ricky, and if time allows, it'd be good to ponder with the participants the real root cause of the lack of supplier innovation, because coming from procurement myself, either we cannot articulate or we cannot get IT or whoever it is to articulate what innovation they actually want. And as you, Ricky, said yourself, the SLAs are all green, so why not? Or we as procurement and sourcing leaders are so good at getting the best possible price that the supplier is not incentivized to innovate in a way that would also create an innovation pod in their division to bring the best practices to this specific buyer. So I think a little bit of introversion is also something helpful for us to say, well, what's the root cause of lack of supplier innovation? Because suppliers are very innovative. So why are they not bringing the supplier innovation to you? Is there something in your contractual models that is preventing or not there yet? I know from my side, thinking back at my own experience, trying to do gain share with suppliers and trying to give them an innovation pot and saying, if you exceed the SLA, we give you a premium, was very, very difficult to actually agree with the C-suite. Yeah, because the budget is X, where are we going to get that from? Because we couldn't articulate what the innovation would bring as a stepping stone to justify the expenditure on that, on that upside that the supplier would get. So very interesting to explore that if time allows and the participants are willing.
Absolutely. I think I couldn't agree more on this. I think it's just if you see kind of if you that's just half the story if you keep on blaming the suppliers for the lack of innovation, right? I mean, there have been so many instances where the procurement organization has themselves also been guilty about they themselves have a position that okay, you get what you pay for, right? If you kind of expecting the lowest cost service, you won't actually get innovation, right? So I think it's the responsibility has to be shouldered by both the parties in us in this situation. Yeah. Uh, if we move on, so yeah, I think there was a question around this as well. So what is it that we're seeing in terms of cost or price increases in happening in the market when it comes to outsourcing, rate card increases, right? So I think more or less very stagnant as you can see on the at least on the left hand side for most of the traditional IT services skills or BPO skills. The rate increases or price increases have been very stagnant, not more than 1-2.5% across, be it offshore or onshore. In fact, at onshore it's much lower, being closer to almost being negative to 1% in most situations, depending on what skill are we talking about specifically. On the more sort of advanced skills, right, the specialized application skills or cloud and cybersecurity, which are slightly more in demand right now, or which is slightly more difficult to find, that's where we kind of seeing some increases. But again, they're still very low compared to the actual cost increases that the providers have had to really bear, given the salary increases that these employees might have had. I think this is in sharp contrast to say the times of 2021 2022, right, where specifically in 2022 we saw annual price increases upwards of 3 to 5% across the board, right? In fact, for some of the next gen skills around cloud, SRE, cybersecurity, the rates were in fact close, the rate increases were touching close to 6 to 8% as well, annual rate increases. So that was a significant, and I think generally speaking clients were also very sort of, they were acceptable to sort of agreeing to that given what was happening in the world, right? I mean, there wasn't as much pressure on them in terms of controlling their cost. But now the situation is very different. So everybody's under a significant cost pressure and they're not agreeing to a lot of price increases, even though the providers are asking for that. So will this change? I think probably if I had to take a guess, probably in the second half of 2024, probably in Q4, things we kind of we feel that we kind of almost bottomed out, and we probably might to see a sort of slight upturn from this going into the second half of 2024. So let's wait and watch. Uh, if we move on, so I think other than rate cards, right? So there's a lot of other themes that we are seeing coming into the market in terms of how our clients managing their outsourcing spend or our supplier spend. I think first and foremost, a lot of organizations this year or this year and over the last 6 months as well have been indulging in benchmarking exercises to kind of assess where they are compared to the market. And when it comes to benchmarking, it's not just about looking at the cost or price, but also looking at an overall holistic solution of the overall engagement, right? Look at how their delivery metrics are, they look at how the SLAs are performing, because at times they've been guilty of asking for, let's say, too stringent SLAs, which may actually result in the vendor asking for a significant higher price to justify meeting those SLAs, right? So kind of review that, relook at what you're asking, what you're getting, right? And then maybe use that as a base for your negotiation or renewal of your outsourcing deal. We're also seeing a lot of portfolio vendor consolidation or rationalization initiatives going on in the market. There have been a few where we've in fact been very closely involved. For instance, there's this particular company where they've had 4 different business entities, and each of these business entities were working with separate vendors or kind of had their own outsourcing arrangement with partners. And they did an initiative last year where they kind of consolidated the spend across these 4 different entities, and they were wanting to bring all of it under one umbrella. And the objective for them was to really that it'll help them drive some synergy, save some costs, and then that the money that will be saved effectively will be drawn back into the business to drive new initiatives to sort of find a way to grow the top line as well. I think a lot of, I think we touched upon innovation. We'll actually drill deeper into this as well in the coming slides, right? So we're seeing a lot of focus on innovation. I don't know why, or I think if we can sort of stick to the previous slide, if you kind of, there's a lot of focus on innovation that has been coming, and we'll talk a bit more in the subsequent pages about how providers are driving it. And then finally, touching upon the last point around integrated outsourcing deals. I think generally there's a realization in the market that clients are realizing that if you kind of are able to consolidate your spend across, say, applications and infrastructure, or consolidate the vendors, you're able to realize good amount of synergy, say anywhere between 5 to 12% of your total spend. And that synergies will be driven by things such as having a common observability stack, or having a unified service management team, or spending less on governance. So some of these levers actually help them drive certain synergies if you're able to drive an integrated outsourcing deals rather than working with separate partners for different parts of your tech stack. So that's where also we're seeing some activity. Victoria, I think I want to sort of want your input as well in terms of, are you sort of seeing anything other than this in terms of how enterprises are thinking about going through the next 12 months in terms of managing their outsourcing spend or cost?
I definitely agree with you that supplier rationalization and portfolio rationalization is a big one in times when cost pressures are high. And also smart suppliers will come to you and say, we have worked within your stack. They probably know more than you think they do about actually what other suppliers you're using within a certain, area, and say, if we do that as well, we can actually give you 5%. 6%. I saw that actually not only within IT, I saw that also within facilities management. If you have facilities management outsourcing within one location versus the whole country or multi-country, the suppliers will tell you that they will be able to drive a better flight plan to cost savings. The challenge, of course, for us, if you look forward, is that if you over-rationalize, then you become over-dependent. Then what will happen is another cycle of actually trying to uncouple or introduce a new supplier in order to, disrupt the balance, the unequal balance of power that one supplier will have. The other interesting thing that I was coaching my C-suite always on is have an understanding of, to do with savings and innovation, have an understanding of where you are, what you are as a client, how important you are to your suppliers. So obviously, Banshi had that ESG slide that you need to rate your suppliers, which are suppliers critical. Every supplier, as I used to also work at a software supplier, we all rated our clients based on importance, criticality, etc. So the first thing I was asking when I came to do a big negotiation with the Oracles, SAPs, whoever of this world, is how important is this account to you? Are we in the top tier or not? Because immediately, if you're not at Microsoft, Google, you name it, every single one of them will rate you as a client in terms of your importance, in terms of your ability to spend with them. The more you spend with them, the more innovation they bring you, because that's their model. So actually turning it all around and sitting with your client team and saying, okay, get me an understanding of how my suppliers think about me as a client. And as a result, should I actually punch below my weight? Everybody knows these big names and they want them. And then they get frustrated that they Accenture, EY, you name it. Everybody wants these big suppliers and they want them to bring in innovation, but they might not be even in the tier one of their supplier list. So isn't it better to go with a second tier supplier in your BPO GPS area, but get all the innovation from them because you are their top tier client, rather than going to the best names ever? And that goes across marketing, everything. You go to the best ones, but you're just a small fish in their pond, right? So actually aligning yourself as a client to your suppliers' strategies and making sure that that partnership is truly beneficial for both parties. And that is about the expenditure, the size, the commitment. That's where actually lasting portfolio rationalization and lasting innovation will come.
Absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree more on this. Yeah.
Today, we also have an offer for the audience over here. We want to give you access to a complimentary report on talent demand trends specific to IT services in India. So this is a very insightful report. You'll see what are the demand trends. So Sumit mentioned a little bit about demand trends in his section, right? So more around that, what are the roles and skills based on all the H2 2023 demand that we saw. It's leveraging all the data that we have from our AI-driven Talent Genius tool. So you just need to look at the chat. Please, request the complimentary report through the link in the chat that has been posted. So the offer is open to everyone who's attended. And now one of the questions I think remaining is, how do we sort of reduce value leakage in our outsourcing contracts?
Yeah, I think we touched upon it briefly. I think so. It's important for clients to look at, or enterprises to look at, not just rate cards, but things such as how do you kind of the overall resource pyramid? Are you using the right locations? Are you too reliant on leveraging only onshore locations? Can you move some of the work to low-cost locations? Are you sort of having the right benefits of automation really accrued as part of your contract, or so things like that, right? Or what was a year-on-year price reduction story look like? What are your standard terms and conditions? Are you asking for too stringent terms and conditions, which is leading the vendor to ask you for a very premium price point, right? So things like that. But typically, we've seen if you're able to sort of identify and work through all these levers, if you're a second gen outsourcer, you could end up realizing anywhere between 30 to 40% of savings, just kind of rationalizing or re-looking at all of these. And a third gen outsourcing contract, which we presume is a bit more optimized and rationalized, probably they could also save anywhere between 20 to 30% of their TCV. So yeah. I think if we move on to sort of conclude this, I think there've been a ton of incentive models that we're seeing in the market right now in terms of amortization, scale-based discounting. Generally speaking, I think given the cost and pricing pressure, we're seeing a lot of incentive themes that providers are being able to offer right now. So it's just about asking for the right things with your providers and just making sure that you're getting some of those as part of your next renewal. If we move on to the fund, I think one page that I want to talk about is really the innovation fund. I think we've seen a ton of contracts, especially in the last 5 years or so, where innovation fund was more of a lip service as part of the contracts, where everybody said, "Oh, we put it in innovation fund as part of this deal," but then how was it, how did it really fare, or was it actually being used more of to fund your project activities? I think it would be the latter, where most clients ended up using this innovation fund to sort of fund their non-critical sort of some key critical projects rather than actually funding it on true innovation. So that's where we're starting to see some of this change, and we're starting to see clients asking for it in terms of, okay, where and how are you going to spend it? How will you help us? How will you enable us to actually work with you towards innovation? And we've stated a few examples here as well for reference. Roughly speaking, roughly about 1 to 4% of whatever you're spending on your outsourced partner could be sort of go into an innovation fund, and that sort of breaks it down into different areas. For example, roughly 40% of that goes into something called as a transformation office, or 1 to 1.5% of the deal value, which is roughly related to having a 5 to 7 member pod comprising of architects and other technical resources who can help you work on next gen technologies, right? Be it Gen AI, be it blockchain, be it ML, right? Any of those initiatives. So using this fund to actually have resources work on these next gen initiatives. So that's where we're seeing a lot of clients able to leverage this as part of their outsourcing construct. I think finally, Bhanushi, do you want to summarize?
Yeah. I think just wrapping up, right? So all the levers that we've mentioned, around, making technology your superpower, plugging your value leakage, optimizing your delivery portfolio. These are the recommendations that we have from our side to sort of manage your, sourcing portfolio. One key aspect that we just want to mention is an event that is going to happen, Engage, Everest Group Engage. So we just want to, give you a view of what this event is about a little bit, and Ricky will just talk for a second or so on it.
Absolutely. I think we're very excited to invite executives, sourcing procurement executives, GBS executives to our first ever event that we're hosting in Dallas from 30th September to 2nd October. So if you're interested, please feel free to look at the website and request to register or request to attend, and we're more than happy to come on a call and discuss. This is going to be more focused on pragmatic themes around how can you possibly use leverage the global services delivery model to shape your future. So look forward to seeing some of you on this.